Ahora, a continuación, el señor embajador de Canadá.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think we all enjoyed very much the presentation that Dr. Mejia, Ambassador Mejia, made this morning. And as he rightly points out in his presentation, Canada is a very late arrival at this table. We certainly weren't in this picture in 1889. We only arrived 100 years later. So in a sense, we're teenagers around this table. And like teenagers, like adolescents, sometimes we have an inappropriate sense of humor. Sometimes we're impatient. Sometimes we're not always respectful of our forefathers. Sometimes we want to change the world. And sometimes we're less concerned with looking back than looking forward. But the presentation that Dr. Mejia gave us this morning is a good springboard from which we can look forward. And here are 5 elements that Canada would like to put on the table as we celebrate the idea of Pan-Americanism, but also the reality of our daily work here in this organization. The first is, of course, and this is no secret, this is something that a number of us said this morning in the Transmisión de Mando this morning, we have to ensure that the OAS's engagement in Honduras leads us back to a solution which respects democracy, the Honduran constitution, and permits the holding of a credible and legitimate electoral process at the end of the day. That's the objective. That is the crisis of the moment. That's the scenario that we should all be working towards together here for Honduras and for the wider community of the Americas. Secondly, it's our belief that we should continue our discussion on democracy, that we need to continue to weigh the threats, that we empower the Secretary General to speak out and to act, that we be alert to the risks to democratic governance and work to diffuse them, and that it be a discussion, to the extent possible, divorced from ideological considerations. And as you yourself said this morning, Mr. Chairman, the Charter, the Democratic Charter, should be our touchstone and our guide in that regard. Third, that we work to strengthen our human rights architecture. As you yourself said, Dr. Mejia, the jewel in the crown of the inter-American system, or you use words to that effect, we have to make it as effective and as well resourced as possible to meet the needs of our peoples. Fourthly, and I'm sorry to put this issue on the table, but we have a crisis of financial sustainability in the OAS, and we have to address that. And we have to address that by some small measures, which, as you yourself, Mr. Chairman, said, imply perhaps a certain discipline in terms of how we organize ourselves here. But I think that it's also a political decision or a political discussion in terms of what it is that here in this organization we want to focus on. And that means, I think, some very difficult choices for all countries around the table. Finally, Mr. Chairman, the issue of consensus, which a number of us have been speaking about this week. How do we ensure a sufficient degree of unity such that we as an organization are still effective? And maybe we won't always get that consensus, and I don't think that we ought to flagellate ourselves for that. We have to recognize that there are differences around the table and that those differences are honorable and sometimes insurmountable. But Canada is certainly ready to work with others around this table to ensure that that irreplaceable patrimony of consensus is sustained to the extent that it can be. And Mr. Chairman, if you'll permit me a final act of undiscipline, who said el sistema multilateral es uno? And who said tengo dos preguntas y tres constataciones? And who said hay que mandar un mensaje político, repito, político sobre este asunto? If you guessed that it was the outgoing chair of the Permanent Council, Mr. Chairman, you would be correct. And this is by way of paying a sincere, heartfelt, and affectionate tribute to the outgoing chair, to say that he has presided over our destinies at a very difficult time and done it with great ability, grace, intelligence, and that there's nobody around this table who cares as much about this organization and the multilateral sistema, which is uno, as he rightly points out, than Ambassador Oyarce. So I wish him a happy retirement on this bench, along with former chairs of the Permanent Council, of which there are a number of us here. Welcome back to the trenches, Ambassador Oyarce.
Muchas gracias al embajador de Canadá, muy especialmente por las 5 reflexiones sobre los retos que debe asumir la OEA y por el reconocimiento que todos reiteramos al embajador Ollarse. A continuación, el señor embajador de Brasil.
Muito obrigado, senhor presidente. Senhor presidente, como esta é a primeira reunião do Conselho Permanente que Vossa Excelência preside, gostaria, de nome do Grupo ALAD, estender-lhe votos de pleno êxito em suas novas funções, neste momento especialmente intenso e tenso nas atividades da Organização dos Estados Americanos. Cabe-me a honra de, em nome do Grupo ALAD, agradecer ao professor Álvaro Tirado